Hello everyone. I'm happy to be here to meet the group and speak in front of everyone. First, I'd like the interpreter to not interpret for a while to give you a feeling of what it's like. Okay, thank you, interpreter. Go ahead. All of you are sitting there for a few minutes wondering what she's saying. I don't know, I can't figure it out. Is the interpreter for me? As my voice piece? No. If the interpreter's here, there should be a perfect match. For me, and for when you're asking questions, so that I have access as well, not only for your access. It's really for both of us. It's important that you remember that. I'm going to plan to go through a number of questions. First, I'll ask the question and ask you to answer. Give you the answers, give you a moment to think about it. Remember your answer. Is it A, B, C? Mistakes don't matter. Really, you're here to learn today. That's what the hour's for. Really to take that information in. Get a little bit of a taste, a little bit of an idea. And you can take those learnings on your way in the future. The second thing I want you to remember is that if you're curious about something, please raise your hand and ask the question. Really, it's important for when you leave that you've had your questions answered. You must have many questions about deafness. Don't be afraid to ask a deaf person a question. I'm here for you to go ahead and ask those questions. So remember, those two things are important as we go through our time today. I'll ask the first question and ask you what your answer is. All right? What's the word for a person who can't hear? First answer, deaf. Second, hard of hearing. Third, hearing impaired. Fourth, physically disabled. And last, I don't know. How many raised your hand for the first one? Please go ahead and raise your hands if you think it's the first answer, deaf. Second, how many people think hard of hearing? Remember, you have to vote. You can't keep your hand down. Nobody answered hard of hearing. Hearing impaired? Maybe about 3 people had that answer. 4, physically disabled. Go ahead, put up your hands. No one. And number 5, you don't know. Please raise your hands. So what's the best answer? The best answer is deaf. Deaf is clear. It includes discussing culture, language, signing. It makes it clear, I'm a deaf person. Throughout America, how many deaf people are there? And I mean really throughout the full spectrum, deaf, hard of hearing. If you whittle that down, if I count Massachusetts, 320,000 people have lost their hearing. Deaf, completely deaf people, 40,000. The next question. Do you think there's one universal language throughout the world, one universal sign language? Is that true or false? How many think it's true? How many think the answer is false? Wow, all of you. I'm surprised. Well, you're right. Europe has different sign languages, and America has ASL, or the full name American Sign Language, with its own grammar, facial expression, different characteristics all together. So the interpreter would be practicing that language, and if they needed to work in another country, they would really have to know that sign language in order to be able to communicate that. Sometimes you might need to interpret consecutively with the person speaking, waiting, and then having the interpreter interpret. For example, the word run, that word has different meanings depending on the sentence that it is in. You know, a run in the stocking, running nose, running water, a running competition. So sometimes when you hear, the interpreter would hear a word, you would need to wait and understand what the concept was before going ahead and interpreting that word. How many people think deaf people are real expert at lip reading? How many think that's true? One person, okay. How many think it's false? Maybe 80–90%. Well, you're right. The research shows that only about 30% of language is visible on the lips. It would lead to a lot of missing information if you were only looking at that information. I have an example for you. I'm going to give... I actually have two words. The first word and the second word. What was that word? Test. Other person said set. 10. Another person said yes. All kinds of different answers. And the second word? One person said sex. Another said sex. 6. Really, I wrote the words down, and so I'll follow it. First I said 6, and then I said sex. So imagine if a person's trying to lip read, and there's key information, and they're missing most of it. It's really tough. So if you're assuming that if a person is reading your lips, it really might be better to be writing down information. For instance, sometimes I go into a store and ask someone how much something is, and I think they say 50 cents, and I put the money down. And then I'm surprised that I learned that they really said 15, not 50. They give me the change back. And you could tell I've missed the information. How many people think that you could look in a book and learn signs and become an interpreter? One person said yes. How many people think it's false? Maybe half. 10 people said that. Really, you can't do that. If you're learning from a book, practicing the signs, That's a real introduction to interpreting and language. You wouldn't become a skilled signer that way. You would need to have in-depth language training, involvement, understanding facial expressions, body movement, in order to be able to translate fluently. Sometimes people think they can look at a book and learn a few signs and think I'm an interpreter, but that's really not accurate.